Hello and welcome. I am Chris and this is Brian from the Endurance Edge, and we are here to talk about resolutions. It's almost
Yes.
the new year if you're watching this relatively close to 2020, but you don't necessarily have to be. So yeah, Brian, I'm wondering, should we set resolutions?
So short answer, yes. I think it's always good as humans that we have behaviors, goals, things that we're going to try to work towards, ways in which we can better ourselves. So short answer, yes, we should set resolutions. The long answer is it's complicated.
Okay, yeah, because I don't necessarily have any perfect statistics on this, but I feel like the majority of resolutions fail and fail quickly. So what are your thoughts on that? Do you have any thoughts on how we can better set goals to set us up for success?
Yeah, so I think you're right. Again, I don't know any hard data or research that's been done on the true statistics of, failure rates of resolutions, but it's quite high. And I mean, we've all been there. We've all experienced it ourselves, or we've, seen it. There's always the big rush in January at your local gym or on the streets when you're running or biking. And then come February, lo and behold, all the machines are empty again, right?
Yeah.
So you're right. It usually is a very quick burnout as well. What I have found uh, in my background is that really the biggest issue for the dropping of the resolutions is two reasons. People try to jump in way too fast, way too hard, way too strong. And so I always say, resolutions need to be more of a strategic merge into your daily life versus let's just jump right in. Cold turkey doesn't really work well for a lot of different types of behavior change. And then the second thing is resolutions are often designed to undo something that we are currently doing that we don't want to do anymore, or something that we don't do at all that we're trying to undo this habit or this behavior of not doing it by now doing it. And the issue that comes with that is there's often a disconnect between the actions or the behaviors you're now trying to do and the way in which you see yourself. And when we have this disconnect with our identity, our image, or how we think of ourselves, how we view ourselves, when that is disconnected with the actions that we're trying to achieve, it's incredibly hard to keep up motivation and to find the need or the urge or just even simply the want to do some of those new actions.
So I hear you saying two things. We go too fast, and then we're already trying to undo something that we're currently doing. So maybe let's start with the first one. Any recommendations on how to not jump in with both feet?
Yeah. Yeah. So again, I used the metaphor earlier of like a strategic merge, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if we're going to be setting goals or creating these new resolutions for the new year, we can't just go all in. It can't be, okay, on January 2nd, I'm going to do a 60-minute workout if you haven't been doing 60-minute workouts up to that point.
Mm-hmm.
What we see happen is an individual, they get into that workout, they might enjoy it in the moment, but then 24 or 48 hours later, all that muscle soreness kicks in. They're totally fatigued. Everything hurts. And they realize, you know what? I don't want to do this. It's not worth it. So they jumped in. They didn't have a strategic merge. So if you're someone that's coming from nearly sedentary, right? Let's start with, hey, for January, I'm going to get 15 minutes of movement in. If you're someone that's kind of moving, but not really, you want to be able to move more, think about what you already do. Think about the behaviors or the exercises that you already engage in. And just think, if I could make this, and I'm just throwing a number out there, 5-10% more, what would that look like? Is it another 10 minutes on the treadmill? Is it another, extra exercise in the weight room, something to just kind of shock my muscles up? Or is it picking up a new sport or a new hobby? Maybe it is getting on a bike, but not getting on a bike and doing, a 10 or a 50 or 100K on a Sunday. It's getting on the bike and maybe you use it as a warm up, or maybe you use it as a cool down. but it's a way in which you're really kind of merging these new behaviors or lifestyles into your day-to-day. Same thing on the nutrition side of it, right? We try to see people on January 2nd go, I'm going to start this diet, and they just go all in with certain types of food. And I would ask you, is that ever successful to just say, okay, nope, I'm only going to eat this? Or is it better to kind of have that little bit of a merge, right? Maybe you have one salad a day versus just going fully cold turkey, right? We need to be able to merge the new with the current, and then slowly but surely, if that builds consistency, right? And then the new can start to replace the old.
I think we're just so hooked on quick change.
Yeah.
You know, I get that a lot from a nutritional standpoint. Well, what can I do that will immediately get this weight off? And then we'll switch gears. You know, they want to see like that initial success, but then 95% of diets fail. That statistic I do know. Like that's
Yeah.
that's a really great fail rate.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Quickest way to lose that weight, let's get a scalpel and let's cut it off. But
So
it's the same thing on the exercise aspect of it. People want the silver bullet for exercise, for losing weight, for motivation, for those types of things. And I mean, human beings as a species, we are not a quick change organism. It takes time for physical changes to occur. It takes time for mental changes to occur. So what I would say is, when we're looking at how do we develop a strategic merge with these resolutions or goals, it really boils down to you have inertia, right? The inability to move. You have the potential energy within you, but you are stuck, right? If there's a big boulder in your path, you can't just run up to it and then move it, right? You have to overcome the inertia of this obstacle. So what do? You get right up on it, and then maybe you lean into it and you kind of start rocking it, and you get these little baby movements, and then slowly but surely you build up a little bit of momentum, and then that boulder is able to start moving forward. Those inertia type goals or inertia type behaviors are the ones that our clients really need to figure out what they are. And so maybe it is, hey, I'm going to wake up 10 minutes earlier in the morning to do stretches. That's not a huge time constraint on their day, but it's something that can help start their day, adding in a little bit of movement, maybe helping them feel a little bit better. And then that 10 minutes can start to blossom into, I know I'm going to do 15 minutes or 20 minutes of a structured yoga class in the morning on YouTube or on a DVD, something like that, which then that blossoms into, I'm going to go for a 30-minute walk in the morning, turns into a 30-minute jog, turns into a 30-minute run. So let's start small. Let's get some inertia goals in place. Let's start to rock the boulder. And then once the boulder's moving, then we can really get to some of those resolutions that we more traditionally set of,
yeah.
I'm going to do it. I'm going to do a triathlon, or I'm going to do an Ironman, or I'm going to do a half marathon. But those are things that we need to look at having, months down the road, especially if we're starting from nearly zero.
So let's use the example, since we have our common clientele, we usually have some endurance athletes, and people aren't necessarily always, we don't always work with elite athletes. We work with kind of a whole slew of people. So let's use the example of, hey, I want to do an Ironman. I've done one triathlon. These are real examples, by the way. I've done one triathlon. It sounds really awesome to do an Ironman. And in my mind, it takes a minimum of 9 months, if not closer to a year or more, to train for something like this if you're coming from zero. Let's use that example. And what do we do? How do we go there? Because there's so much to learn too. So is it throwing the dart way far out? I'm going to shoot for 2 years from now, or to like extend that, to have that sort of strategic merge that you were talking about. Let's use that as an example and talk us through that one.
Yeah, that's a great one. So, from in that example, that individual's starting already at a better foundation, right? At a better launch point, because they have done a triathlon or several of them. So they've got a little bit of some of the prerequisite kind of skills, if you will. So for that individual, if they've already shown some of the determination and the motivation to train and prepare for a triathlon, they've got the seeds for the success for the Ironman as well. So for that individual, I would say, and of course, this is a very individual basis, right? If they're 9 months out, like you say, then let's throw the dart, right? On January 1st, you find that Ironman, you put the dart on the dartboard, but then it's backwards planning, right? Just like you do with all the clients, which is great. The problem that we get into when we have a long-term goal is that every day training for that long-term goal, thinking about achieving the long-term goal, is a pretty quick path to burnout as well. Because let's say you'll wake up on a cold morning in February to go on a long run to help you train for this Ironman that's still 9-10 months away. And you think to yourself, that's a long ways away. I don't need to do this morning. I can make up for it tomorrow, or I can make up for it next week. We get really excited at the outset, but then we're all going to experience a little bit of a dip in that motivation, especially when that goal is a long ways away, because we trick ourselves. Our brain is always looking for comfort. Our brain doesn't necessarily look for the challenges. Our brain looks for comfort. And so the brain sees this opportunity to say, yeah, but that's so far away. You don't have to do that right now. We can make up for it. We'll double the effort later on to make up for not doing it today.
It's like cramming for an Ironman.
Exactly. Cramming for an Ironman. So what we need to be able to do when we're doing this, the backwards planning phase, is we need to set those smaller goals along the way, right? So what's the goal? What's the aim for the month of February? What's going to be the theme of this month? And then you can even get even more granular than that. Hey, this week, this is going to be our focus. And so it's really shifting away from this outcome goal of just purely date of the Ironman and the, target time of the Ironman, but it really boils down to the process goals. Hey, on these runs that are going to be of a certain distance, I need to make sure that you are feeling a certain way at the end of it, that we're not getting any pain, that you are feeling a little bit stronger. So we're focusing a little bit more on process than just, did you run your 10 miles? Did you run your 12 miles? Did you do X amount of workouts? It's also about building up the strength, building up the confidence. But again, going back to just having this theme, having these more granular kind of checkpoints along the way to maintain that motivation.
So what I heard you saying a lot is what we use in training is periodization. So
Absolutely.
break things down into training cycles. So how can we apply that to another very common goal that we see a lot here, weight loss? I would like to lose 50 pounds by tomorrow.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Let's pull out our magic pill.
Yeah.
Should we apply that same kind of technique to something like a weight loss goal?
Absolutely. So periodization it's phenomenal. It's one of the best training protocols, and really it might not be the textbook way every time, but you follow essentially the same path for all types of goals. When we're talking about weight loss, it's the same kind of concept I talked about earlier. You got to have your inertia goals, and you've got to have a strategic merge. The cold turkey, it rarely works for a lot of behavior change. And really what I find I talk the most with when I'm working with our weight loss clients is going back to that other idea, that other concept of the disconnect between the way in which they view themselves, their self-image, and the behaviors that they want to undertake. And so weight loss, we find, is a lot of undoing versus what I do, right? I need to stop doing this, so I'm going to start doing this. I'm going to undo this bad behavior by simply doing a good behavior.
Okay.
But again, our brain doesn't like that. Our brain is very comfortable and it's used to what you were doing. And so the example I always give is, if you're going to go out and try to start eating healthy, but you don't see yourself as a healthy individual, it's hard to achieve and maintain the motivation for healthy eating.
Right.
Because it's effortful. It's something that you feel like you are having to do because you're unhealthy and you're trying to undo the unhealthiness. So we need to change the identity. We need to change the way we view ourselves and think about ourselves. Even if you are not a healthy individual, you can still think of yourself and start to change your mindset around the language you use for yourself. Because then if you do start to think of yourself as a healthy individual, what tends to happen then is all of that healthy food is not effortful anymore and something that you're going out of your way to do. It's something that you do because that's how you see yourself. You
For
see
identity.
yourself as a healthy person. That is your identity. I eat the salad not to undo all the bad choices, but I eat the salad because this is who I am. This is what I want to do versus what I have to do.
So in that example, okay, so I want to lose 50 pounds, or, Sally wants to lose 50 pounds, or whatever the case may be. Do you start with setting a goal of like a mindset set shift, or an identity change, or like where would you start?
Yeah. So I think it's fair to start with saying this is the X that I'm trying to get to. 50 pounds of weight loss or a certain body fat percentage weight loss. Like that's fair. I know there's a lot of literature that says to stay away from that and to only focus on feel and look, and there's fairness in that too, but it's not necessarily wrong to say, I'm going to start with this. I am 250. I want to get to 200. That's nice, clean, round numbers, and it makes sense. The problem is that we get fixated on that. What we need to get fixated on is what you had said. Step 2 would be, how do I see myself right now? When I think of myself, when I think of going out to eat, when I think of the way I'm perceived, or the way in which I view myself towards others, how do I look? And not just visually, how do I look, but just how do I look at myself? And so I would start there, because what we find is we are very hard on ourselves. We're always going to be our own biggest critics, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is why we set resolutions, because we're very critical of ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Man, I need to make a change. So start there. Look at all the ways you're criticizing yourself or the way in which you're defining yourself. And I hear it a lot with our weight loss clients. There's tons of comparisons to ways in which they used to be. And so there's this constant kind of just battle inside. And they go, well, I used to be like this, and I used to, feel like this, and I just don't feel like that anymore. And I get tired a lot. And all of these are true, right? We're not ignoring the truths. But then it's, okay, well, how do you see yourself in 6 months? If you were to achieve this 50-pound weight loss or whatever the X is, what do you think you'd get out of that? How would you feel in that regard? What would be your thoughts or the words you would use to describe yourself? And giving them this opportunity to kind of close their eyes, put themselves in that state. And, they'll come up with some great terminology. They'll say things like, I would feel more free, and I would just feel lighter, not in the physical sense, but just emotionally and
Yeah.
mentally. I would just feel lighter. I would feel like I could do more things. Yes, there'd be some happiness, fulfillment, all those great words. And I say, okay, well, let's start talking about yourself as if you're already there. Let's put yourself at X and think of yourself as being at X on a daily basis. And then once we do that, we craft up essentially a narrative for them. And it often looks like a paragraph, maybe just a couple sentences. And for lack of a better term, it becomes their mantra, right? It becomes something that they wake up every day and they read it or they listen to it. Maybe it's something strategically before every meal they read it, right? Because if you're getting ready to go to the cafeteria or go to the restaurant or whatever it is, and then you sit there and you're reading in your car or on your phone, and it says, I'm a healthy individual. I live, I have freedom in my choices. I feel lighthearted, everything like that. If you say that to yourself right before you go in to make that difficult choice on food, that choice isn't as difficult anymore. That points you in the right direction.
It's kind of like having like a compass in a way.
A little bit. Yeah.
Yeah.
A little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, so we've talked about the weight loss example, and we've talked about going, sort of this strategic merge. Tell me a little bit more about the undoing of current habits, and you use whatever example you feel necessary.
Yeah, so habits are tough to undo because they're ingrained in us, right? They've become habitual for a reason. Usually there's a little bit of kind of laziness, and whether it's by choice, so conscious or unconscious, there's maybe just a little bit of laziness, right? And that's okay. There's nothing necessarily wrong with that. So how do we undo a habit? Well, usually a habit or the action is done by some type of cue, and the cue is usually external. There's a great book around this by Charles Duhigg called The Power of Habit. And he goes into
Yeah.
this fantastic book. So oftentimes what we're trying to do is we're trying to change the behavior of the habit, but we can't change the cue that initiates the habit. So
Uh-huh.
what we need to do to undo a habit is simply find a replacement task, find a replacement behavior, because the cues are rarely going to change. They're usually external from us. We don't have a whole lot of control over those. But if we've got now something in place that we can have that's maybe a healthier option, a better option, a smarter option, that's how we undo habits. Again, the cold turkey method, it can work for some, but it's usually not very effective. So what
So
we
give
need
us
to,
an example of a cue,
a
but
key,
particularly an environmental cue.
yeah. So that's a good question. So
Could it be like uh, coming home from work every day? I need a beer.
yep,
So the cue is just, I just came home from work. I walked in the front door.
yep, yeah. So
Um,
walking in that front door, and the cue or the old habit has been, as soon as I get home, right, I reach for that beverage or that bottle of wine, that bottle of beer, whatever, because that's been your relaxation, right? So what I would then say is, okay, the cue is coming home. The habit that you've been doing, the old habit for relaxation, is the drink, right? If you're still seeking relaxation, which is fair, what's something else that is relaxing for you that you could do instead of the beverage, right? Now, there's nothing wrong with alcohol, right? Everything in moderation.
right.
But if you're trying to undo it, then you need to make sure that you have something in place, a solid activity, a solid behavior to replace it with. So maybe it's okay, on the drive home, I'm going to remind myself of this, right? What's my intention or what's my exercise when I get home? But as soon as I get home, I'm going to stretch for 5 minutes, or I'm going to take a quick walk around the block, or I'm going to do something else. What is this other replacement activity? Or I'm going to come home and I'm going to drink a glass of water instead, right? I'm going to hydrate. Maybe throughout our days, maybe we're not as good with water as we should be, right? So you're still kind of mimicking this task of drinking, but we're kind of tricking ourselves by doing the same type of task. It's just a different liquid, right? So there's a bunch of different ways we can kind of get clever with this. I think one thing that's been shown to be pretty effective is what's called implementation intentions.
Mm.
Essentially, it's if-then strategies. And this is another place where we see a lot of folks fall off the wagon when it comes to resolutions, right? They say, I'm going to go to the gym and I'm going to go run on the treadmill for 30 minutes after work. Or I'm going to come home from work and I'm going to get a quick little workout in. But then you come home from work and the kids are going crazy. Something's happened at the house. You got to take care of it. House is dirty, whatever it is. And so it derails you and you start doing this instead. Or you get to that gym and you look at the treadmill bank and it's totally full.
Right.
And what do most people,
January.
yeah, in January, and what do
Right.
most people do when they're already kind of on the fence for some of these things, and they say, I'm going to go to the gym and do 30 minutes on the treadmill, and they get to the gym and the entire treadmill bank is full? What does that person typically do?
Goes home.
They go home, right? Because they're just like, oh, well, I guess I can't do it today.
Mm-hmm.
So implementation intentions are if-then strategies or if-then goals. And so basically it's a little bit of expectation management, right? And it's to help buffer against that. You get to the gym, the implementation intention is, if the treadmill banks are full, I'm going to walk for 30 minutes, or I'm going to do some light stretching for 15 minutes until a treadmill opens, or I'm going to use an elliptical or the Stairmaster or some strength training. It's simply saying, hey, if this happens, if when I get home, shit has hit the proverbial fan and
Right.
I'm not going to let it derail me, because if that happens, I'm going to handle it. I'm going to take 10 minutes trying to address the issue. Then I'm going to do something else. Or if I had 30 minutes planned, I'm going to have a 15-minute kind of backup, maybe HIIT workout that I can do just in case. So those if thens are also great ways to kind of undo habits, because some of the habits that we fall into are the bad ones, where we slip into laziness. We get home, hey, when I get home, I'm just going to relax, right? And have that beverage. Well, if when I get home, instead of having that beverage, then I'm going to do something else. So if then strategies are a great way to overcome that as well.
So it sounds like, um, it, it sounds like with our goals, we tend to be too single railed, if you will. But like you mentioned, then we get derailed. Well, it sounds like you're creating scenarios where you're not derailing yourself. You're just taking a little bit of a turn in a different direction. But
Yeah,
it's all generally going in the same direction. Like you're still going for your goal, but if plan A doesn't happen, then we have a plan B, C, and D for those inevitable life events.
absolutely. I mean, and again, this goes back to, expectation management. Everyone's familiar with SMART goals and the SMART acronym: specific, measurable, action-oriented, realistic, time-bound.
Mhm.
And I'm not a big fan of it. I'm really not, because it does make it very linear, as you just mentioned, right? Very single rail. And what you need is, you need to have these additional options, because no one operates in a vacuum and life happens. And so a massive reason for why we get off of these resolutions is poor expectation management, right? And so it's, I'm going to do this, and then as soon as there's that obstacle in place, we forego it, and we say, well, this is too difficult. If you're going on a family vacation and you put Disney World into your GPS, but I-95 has a backup, you don't just scrap the whole vacation. You look for the workarounds. You look for those side streets and those alternate routes. That's how your goals need to be. That's what your resolutions need to be. And you're exactly right. Hey, plan A, if I was in a vacuum and everything was great and life never threw curveballs, this is what it would be. This is how long it would take. And this is what I have to do. But I know that curveballs are going to happen. I know I'm going to have days where it's cold and it's rainy, or I'm just not feeling it. So on those days, when those things happen, what's the plan B? What's the plan C? What's my if thens? And also, let's start small, right? Let's get those little 1 to 2 to 5% changes, and then let's build that up over time to get to that place where we want to be.
So if we were to start, let's say, writing our goal down on paper, what do we start with? A big goal and then list out our obstacles, or list out like, a little bit sort of like a SMART goal, but what's your suggestion?
Yeah, so as my grandmother would say, there's many ways to skin a cat, right? Yeah,
Granny always knew best.
yeah, and I don't want to know how she knew about skinning a cat, but conversation for a
Point.
different, conversation for a different day. Uh, so yeah, there's one strategy around, okay, what's the big goal? Let's start with, it's kind of like the big rock method. What's the big rock? Okay, we get that, and then, okay, well, in order to achieve that, there's probably some sub goals or some categories or domains that we can focus on. And then those sub categories or sub goals, domains, we can then break those down into smaller chunks, to where we're basically going from this big rock all the way down to grains of sand. And the grains of sand are probably your daily actions or behaviors. That's certainly a method, right? I think a great way to also add on to your goal setting plan is to do kind of what you mentioned about it's called mental contrasting in the research. So for basically very simplistic terms, what's the pros and cons of achieving this? Because when we come up with this big rock, we can oftentimes kind of be lost in the juice of the moment and be really, really hyped. We know that actually, if we sit down and say, okay, I'm going to do an Ironman in next November 2020, you need to sit down and say, actually, what's going to be the difficult, difficulties in achieving this? What are going to be my obstacles? What are going to be the challenges? What are going to be some of the setbacks I might face, right? Being realistic, talking about, potential injuries, right? If you've got a history of injuries, chances are they might flare up during the training process. So bringing in a lot of these things early on in the process helps buffer against when they actually happen down the road. It's a great way to do some expectation management, great way to implement some if-then strategy. So yeah, if I do get hurt, right, then this is what I'm going to do. Above and beyond just the great rehab protocols that you're going to write for them, it's also mentally having that if-then capability as well. Some folks, so we talked about Big Rock. You can say, hey, monthly, this is what I want to do. And you call that kind of like the medium rock strategy, right? It's maybe not these massive goals that you want to do, but hey, by the end of February, going back to your 50-pound example, by the end of February, I want to see if I can be down 5 pounds in 2 months, right? So, and then by the end of March, I want to see if I can drop another 2 pounds and see if we can just maybe keep it at 2 pounds, 3 pounds, 4 pounds, or whatever working with you that is most realistic for them. So there's bunches and bunches of ways in literature on goal setting. And ultimately it comes down to, you got to know who you are. Mm-hmm. You got to know what's worked for you in the past. Let's leverage that. And then let's also maybe think a little bit outside of the box and add in some of those additional strategies.
So I think that's a perfect segue to what you specifically do. So tell us a little bit about that, because you're not necessarily a licensed psychologist, you're a certified sports psychologist. So tell us how that is different and what are the benefits of working with somebody like you?
Yeah, so you're exactly right. Not licensed psychologist. So the joke that I always give to try to explain that better is, there's no sofa, right, that I'm going to lay you on to talk about mommy and daddy and why that's keeping you from running, right? There's a great field, right, and that's really good at that type of psychology, but I'm a sport and performance psychologist. So by nature, my interest is in the top performers in their fields. What makes these elite athletes, elite business individuals, elite soldiers, you name it, what makes them so much better than others? And so it's not physical. They don't have some genetic trait that you don't. It's more often than not, it is a mindset. It's something going on mentally that they are doing differently, or they've been able to leverage that the average person doesn't. And so I bring that science, I bring that research into my consulting, into my coaching. So whereas a traditional psychologist, has certain kind of terms and, thoughts that come to mind, I see myself more as an actual coach. So working with you, looking into, historically, what are your strengths? What have you utilized in the past to get you where you are? Let's leverage that. There's probably not a whole lot we have to fix with individuals. It's more about just kind of unlocking what's already inside of them so that they can achieve their best. Because along the way, we've subconsciously just created roadblocks and obstacles for our own potential.
So that's where you come in, is helping them unlock those roadblocks or get through them, I suppose.
Absolutely. Yep. And then for some individuals, it is the creation of new identities, or it is the creation of maybe some new strategies or skills that maybe they have never put into play before. So it's not Band-Aids, right? I always have to say that, right? They're just like with you, right? There's no silver bullet. If there was, we'd both be
We'd both be on a beach in Tahiti.
Yeah, we'd be way, way more, wealthy than we are right now.
We both love what we do. So
yes, yeah. But absolutely, I would not stop what I do. That's 100%. Right. So it's not Band-Aids. There's no silver bullets. It's kind of like what we talked about, right? It's always going to be this slow evolution of growth. That's the identity of humans, is we can change, but it takes a little bit.
Yes. I think that is the perfect way to kind of tie it with a bow. So, Awesome. Yes. So thank you so much, Brian, for bringing all your wisdom and insight to this conversation on resolutions and goals. So once again, I am Chris. I'm the head coach and dietitian at the Endurance Edge. And this is Brian. He is our certified sports psychologist at the Endurance Edge. So if you want to schedule something with him to check in on those resolutions or restructure your goal, then you can do so online, theenduranceedge.com. You can also reach out to him, brian.w@theenduranceedge.com. So we'll make sure that you guys have all that contact information. Any last words of wisdom as we sail out into the sunset?
I mean, I think we've covered it. This has been a blast. I hope to hear, from some of our clients about this, especially if they've got some questions. And I look forward to some future webinars. But enjoy the holidays, and I look forward to hearing about everyone achieving some new goals.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian.
All right, take care.